In this video, I'm going to show you a few things, and what's common between all the things is matched photo. The new matched photo, it's called. When you import an image, you'll see that option. Let's make a new model just so I can bring that up. Import image, use as new matched photo. And in particular, I'm going to show you how to stitch together multiple photos in the same model using matched photo. And it involves moving the axis point very carefully and deliberately. Here's a really simple example I will be showing. Then I will continue to a more detailed example. And in this one, I used it not so much to model this interior space, but to look at what these pinball machines and foosball tables might look like in this space. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll first model this trash bin. It's a fairly simple shape and its size is easily measurable. I've got two photos taken from opposite angles of this trash bin, and I took these with an iPhone. Nothing special, just point and shoot. The subject is in the center of the image. That is important, and I don't have any fancy lenses, obviously, and I have not cropped these images. Those are all important components when doing a matched photo. And I will import a image type, making sure to select use as new matched photo. Now this dialog looks a little bit different on Windows, but just look for the new matched photo option and make sure that is selected. When you first do this, you will very clearly see the matched photo interface. There's a lot of grid lines and dashed lines and some colors, a little bit different than what most people are used to in SketchUp. And I recommend by first placing the axes intersection point, shown by this little yellow square. Position that where you're going to start. Now in this example, if I was really smart and this was only the thing I was going to model, I would pick this corner here because that corner is visible in both images. But the point of this video is to show you how and eventually why you might want to stitch multiple photos together in the same model using matched photo. So that's why I'm going to start with this corner here. Plus, I like to start with the corner that's generally closest to the viewpoint. Once that is positioned, using the matched photo, you simply drag these perspective lines. Now this is, again, a fairly simple example that I'm going to show. I'll move into a slightly more complicated one, but if you are interested, I have also created another video titled SketchUp Match Photo Creating Signage, and I go through a couple more examples that are a little bit more detailed using matched photo. And in that example, I actually create a couple site objects that are signs. So back to this one, let's go ahead and move up here. Now also, I'm clicking and dragging with the mouse, and I'm using the middle wheel button to invoke this pan tool that allows me to zip around fairly quickly. By default, the middle wheel button would orbit, but once we are in this mode, it is in pan mode. And incidentally, if you accidentally click out of this, and there, now that middle button is orbiting, you can jump back by clicking on the Scene tab and then right-clicking and select Edit Match Photo. That will bring back this interface. So I'll go ahead and continue to position these. Another important feature or requirement, I should say, is your image should be reasonable resolution, and you need to have squared off components. So this is a very square-ish shape. Notice that I'm not using the angle up here. That would not work. I have to use lines that are horizontal to the ground but also at 90 degrees to one another. The red being 90 degrees to the green, and the reds and the greens parallel to one another. So that looks pretty good. The next step is to set your model scale, not the image, but set your model scale to the right size. And that's where this grid comes in. On the Match Photo dialog window, I'm going to change that number to 5 feet and hit enter. And notice this grid changes. Now, if I hover over this blue axis and drag up or down, I can resize that grid. Now, I'm thinking the top of this is right about 5 feet. So let's go ahead and select that right there. It might be a little bit off, but for the sake of this example, we'll call that 5 feet. So this first part is done. I'll go ahead and click done, and that kicks us back into model space. I can orbit. That image goes away because that image only makes sense from this exact viewpoint created when I first imported and configured that environment. So I strongly recommend always start simple. I like to grab just the pencil tool and always start at the origin point. I would not want to start up here because there's an infinite number of points underneath my pencil in model space. But here there's only one point. It's the intersection of the axes. It's also the corner of this trash bin. So I will click, move my mouse in the green direction to the left, click here, and I'll use shift. Once I've found or that I can see the red direction, I'll hold down shift. That makes it a little bit thicker. That also locks it. Now I can move my cursor over here on the right side, and I'll just click there. That sets that back corner that we can't see. Green direction once again, shift once again to lock, and now I will infer back to the origin point. Click, and then I can close off that shape. There we go. I've got the base of this correctly modeled. And if I grab the measure tool, I can see that that is about 7 feet by 9 feet. So that's probably pretty close. Let's go back to here. Now we can get a little more advanced. I'll use the push-pull tool and push-pull this up, clicking and releasing, as opposed to click and dragging. I like to click and release. Just for this reason alone, you can zoom in and out after you've started the operation. With the select tool, I'll click on that back edge. With the move tool, I will just click in space over here and move that up. And because I'm clicking and releasing, it's a little bit easier to zoom in. And I want to make sure I'm staying in the blue direction. Notice it's getting off a little bit, but it's not bad. It's not a super exact science. It's more for approximation. But that looks pretty good. Well, let's go ahead and project some textures. Right click and select project photo. Let me move so you can make sure that's on the screen. Right click and project photo. There we go. So if you're in a super hurry, you could just go ahead and sample. Paint bucket tool, I will hold down Command on a Mac. I think it's Control on Windows. That will allow you to sample an image. I'll just apply that over here. So that's one thing you can do, but I want to show you how to stitch together multiple photos. So let's undo that, because the next really important step that I see a lot of people forgetting about is not positioning the image correctly. So we've photo matched or matched photoed this scene. Now I'll do this one. What I recommend is that you orient your model to roughly match the image before you import it. So that's important step number 1. The next important step is to set the axes to a new corner. So once again, I could have used this corner to start with because that is in common between the two. But let's just say I wasn't thinking that far ahead, and now that corner is behind this modeled component, so I can't see it. It's tough to match that up to the image when you can't see it. So let's set a new component axes. I will keep the solid red, green, and blue in the same direction. So notice here's my solid red, here's my solid green, and I'm going to make sure that my new axis reflects that, even though it is in a new location. Now I will import trash number 2. still use matched photo, and the same steps apply. I will position that axis to the new corner, and I will position the dashed perspective lines. First, I'll just get them kind of close, and then I like to zoom in and position these. Now, as you are doing these, it's a good habit to ignore what's happening in your model. Things will eventually line up. Don't worry that this ghosted shape is much larger than the actual trash bin. We'll fix that in 1 minute. Also worth noting, when you are taking photos that you know you are going to use with this tool, it's a good idea to keep your subject, or at least the parts you are going to model, somewhat in the center of your image. You don't want to crop these. That's also important. Photo match just works better when it's somewhat straightforward. Now I can see here my blue axis is not aligning as much as I would like to that edge, which makes me think one of these is not aligned as well as it could be. And I don't know which one. Maybe this. You know what? I'm going to try this line instead. I can see this a little bit clearer on this side. There we go. It's getting better. It's a little bit off up here, but you know, that's okay. I'd like to show you a little fix for that. Before we do that, let's go back to here. And remember, I changed the grid with this dialog. Well, that grid is still set to 5 feet, and that's really just intended to be a reference point for you to size your model. Well, right now my reference point is the model itself. It's this ghosted out shape that I've already drawn. So if I click on that blue axis and drag once again, it should line up pretty good, which it does. See, it's a little bit off over there, but I think I drew it about like that. A little bit off on the side. But in terms of match photo, it's close enough. So I'll go ahead and hit done. And as before, I can right click on a face and select project photo. Now, when you right click, you might see different contextual menu items. That's okay. I just have a handful of plugins that are probably different than what you have installed, but you should see project photo if you're following along. There we go. There's the dumpster. Once this is complete, it's really easy to tweak these because I can right click on a surface, go to texture, and then select position. That brings up this dialog. And there is a really important distinction here. You're going to have fixed pins or not fixed pins. And if you right click, you will see fixed pins. It'll either be checked or not. If it's checked, these will be colors, and they do different things. They do moving, which is what red does. They will do scaling, which is what green does. For this example, I don't want those checked, so I'm going to right click, deselect fixed pins. Really important with these. Clicking and releasing versus clicking and dragging. Clicking and releasing will pick up that push pin. So it allows you to grab it and reposition it. Think of this image now like a piece of fabric. And if you click again, you're pushing that push pin into the fabric. Now if I click and drag, it's as if you're stretching that fabric. So click and release, click to position, click and drag. It allows you to come in here and tweak the image ever so slightly. You can hit return when you are done. Now, the nice thing about this is the axis location is remembered in both of these match photo scene tabs that are created. So notice that axis changes between the two. Now I will move into a more advanced example on a couple of levels. One being it's an interior scene, and two, it's multiple images that when I eventually connect the first to the third, you'll see that there's not really any common corners. So here's a situation where you might have multiple, 3 or more images that you want to stitch together, which you can. And the requirement is you need to be able to connect the dots somehow. So one scene has to have a common corner with another scene, which has to have a common corner with another scene. And to show you a really extreme example, this model was actually created for the most part using matched photo. When that tool first came out, I was experimenting with it, and I started by taking a photo from this corner of this Metro drug, and I modeled it up. I started adding some detail, and I eventually removed the photo. But before I did that, I took a photo here, moved on down the street, took a photo, moved on down the street, took a photo, moved the angle of the camera, took a photo, and I did that all the way around this whole downtown area. And with a little bit of tweaking, I was able to realign all of these buildings. A very extreme example, but just to show you how powerful the matched photo feature can be. And that was done, I think, in 2006, before there was other geo-modeling options available. Let's go back over to SketchUp, and I'm going to move this out of the way. I'll start a new file. And just as before, we'll start with import image. I'll do break for break room and make sure that it's set to new matched photo. Now this one I'll go through a little bit faster. Position the axes point to where you would like to start. This one is very convenient in that it has perspective lines on the floor in the grid pattern and on the ceiling with the dropped ceiling, as well as this shape. Interior scenes are generally easier to photo match than exterior scenes, because even ground planes can change with slopes, and site furnishing can be rotated to cause some small issues, but this is fairly easy. I will use the top of that wall. All right, that looks pretty good. The blue line will help you verify that it was aligned correctly. If your blue line is off like that, it usually means you need to revisit your perspective lines or revisit the actual photograph, because the photograph may have been manipulated. You can't do any perspective or lens correction in Photoshop. You really don't want to do much post-production. Again, just an iPhone works well because it just takes the photo as is, and you don't have a lot of options to really mess with the focal length and whatnot. Once this is created or established, you can return to the match photo, and as before, I changed the spacing to 5 feet. This time I'm going to type 10 feet. So now each grid represents 10 feet. All of these other buttons just change how the grid is represented, but regardless, everything is still 10 feet. So let's turn those off. And I will grab this, drag this up. 10 feet is the height of the ceiling in this room. So that looks good. I will hit done. As before, pencil tool just to keep it simple. I'll go click there, click here, moving a little bit faster this time. Right click and select project photo. I like to model a little bit, orbit. I can draw some other things, go back, etc. So one thing you might want to do with match photo is just to change the environment or add items, and in that situation, this is all you would really need to do. So a slight tangent moment here, but perhaps I want to put a pinball machine or a foosball table in this break room. So I've got a foosball table over here that I'm going to attempt to drag into my model. There we go. And let's put that, how about, whoops, not down. There we go, maybe right there. And that wall gives you enough of a reference point to position that. And if I click back to the scene tab, I can see what that table would look like in context. Now it's a little ghosted out intentionally so you can model in and around it. I will address that in a little while. But you know what, let's add something else here. Let's go, and you can see I've also already been searching for things to put into my new break space. I'll go ahead and put this pinball machine because medieval madness looks like fun. The classic 1995 pinball machine. All right, let's put that here. So there's a couple problems. One is facing the wrong way and it's still ghosted. As soon as I orbit, that changes. But I can rotate this with the move tool active right there, and I'll position that into place. And maybe I really like pinball, so I'm going to put 2 of these. I hit my Option key on the Mac to invoke the copy tool, put that there. And maybe, since I know this edge is the edge of that wall and there's a space over here, I want to put this foosball table, I'll make a copy of that and put that one over here too. And I'll reposition this later, just kind of getting it close. And I'm getting a little bit off topic because I want to show you how to stitch together multiple photos in the same model using match photo. But here I can see that model is behind that wall, and let's hide these for now. So I'm going to hold down Shift, select those 3 components or 4 components, and I will hide those while I model the rest of this. Let's take a look back here. What's the next image I want to bring in? This one. Now it does have a common corner back over here, but since this one is closer to the camera, I'll go ahead and move it to that position, the axes. And remember, in the last example, I recommended that you should really orient the view just roughly to match. You know what? And sometimes this happens. It's a small glitch to that brings up these edges on the left and right. And it happens when you are moving from a matched photo scene before the scene transition is complete. Oh, and that kicked it out. There's a tool to deactivate that. I forget where it's under. I think it's under camera tools. But, you know, that's something. Advanced camera tools. There we go. Advanced camera tools. This icon at the bottom or at the end kind of has the red X and the bars on top and bottom. I believe that fixes that. But back to this. I just want to orient this roughly to match the view that I will be importing. So here's that wall there. Come back. Don't forget to change the axes location, keeping the red and green in the same position. And as soon as I import that other scene, I'll just really roughly position that down here and hit done. That location is saved. So I can jump back and continue to edit in this view, which, you know what, I'll go ahead and do that. And then as soon as I go back again, I can edit that other scene as well. So I'm just going to add this door. Let's erase that. That texture just was picked up from here, so it moved along. If I jump back here, well, the door doesn't quite align yet because I need to continue to edit this. And I can either right click and select edit, or I can click this little cog icon on the match photo dialog. There we go. The starting location is pretty close, and I will try to quickly get these into position as I did before. And since I've already explained why you want to do this, you might want to pause and just do it and pick up, or fast forward if you are already ahead. And you can probably hear my little mouse wheel working away here. Did I mention you really should be using a mouse with this? Primarily because of that middle button functionality. I'm also a staunch proponent of not installing third-party mouse software, because if you click the middle wheel button and junk is popping up on your screen, that means you installed some stuff that's no good. That's not a problem I can solve right now. Just Google the solution, I guess. But I've got my perspective lines somewhat lined up. I can now hover over that blue axis and then click and drag, and then all I need to do is really align this. And look at that door is falling into place. If I zoom up here, I'll just get that to touch the roof or the ceiling, I guess. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'll hit done. And now I can continue to model this side. I'll just use the pencil tool. Okay, here's a situation where I could eye it because there's the ceiling, but because I've already got geometries that I know I want this to match, I want to infer or reference that geometry. You can do that simply by hovering. I'm just touching that point. Now as I move back, I can infer the blue direction, and when I get to a certain point, I will see it snap. That's where I want to click. And now I can infer directly over that point and click. And you can also hold down Shift. The pencil tool is surprisingly powerful. And in fact, SketchUp, you guys should do a pencil drawing competition. Just let people create models that are only drawn with a pencil. I don't know how you would police that, but it'd be kind of a fun experiment. Erase that line, and I can see now that this is coming together rather quickly. And I'll go ahead and right click, project photo. Now I can fix things like this as well. I don't even need to be in this view necessarily. I will orbit out, and now I can use the projected photo as a reference point. And I can push pull that in. Whoops, I had that face selected, so let's undo that. Push pull this one in. How deep do you want to push pull this? How deep is this? Well, that is why it's kind of ghosted out when you get to this view. It's a mashup of the actual photo match, and your textures are a little bit ghosted out. That's why I can see through this. But look at this. Here's why. I can catch just a corner of that. So now I know how far to push that back. Without even measuring this, without really knowing anything other than the ceiling height in here, I'm starting to get a really good idea of the size of this area. I can measure this with the measure tool, and I can see that it is about 5 feet wide, 5.5 feet wide, and it's about 3 feet deep, and that would actually be pretty close. So that looks pretty good. At this point, I would probably come around here and clean up this model and do a few things like change this texture. Wouldn't be a matte video without some tangent moments here. I'm going to draw a square, just a rectangular shape over this area, and then I'll use the scale tool and I'll just drag that on down just to kind of cheat the texture a little bit. Then with the paint bucket tool and bringing up the eyedropper by holding down Option on a Mac, Windows slightly different. I think you may even have the eyedropper tool over here, and apply that to this other face. So already it's looking nicer. How about some depth to these walls? These are probably 5 inches deep. So let's see here. If I grab my push pull tool, start it, type 5 inches and enter. There we go. Oops, I lost my texture, but oh well, what are you gonna do? Double click, double click, double click. And I lost a little bit over here because I wasn't really being careful. That's okay, just need to heal that surface. And let's go over here. Here's an example. If I push pull this, that is keeping the face. Okay, sometimes if you don't want it to move the face, I'm going to undo that. You can hit a modifier key. In this situation, it is Option. So if I hit Option, it will create a new face and it keeps the old one. But I'm just going to go ahead and heal these surfaces, or at least attempt to. Whoops, wrong tool. Hit Escape, Pencil tool, healed surface. There we go. And you know, it's not absolutely perfect. The method I'm showing you, I've lost a couple of my textures, but I can return back to this scene here and quickly add those textures back by right-clicking and projecting the photo. Problem solved for that. Okay, so we've got one more view to add here, and it's roughly from this angle. That is this scene here, right here. A little bit trickier. And again, I'm using this more as an example to show why you'd want to stitch together. And here's an example that I don't quite have the time for, but to show you how powerful this method can actually be at the end of the day. So there's my view. I'll just roughly, ever so roughly, eye it and position my axes to this corner, keeping that axes red and green directions the same. And File, Import, break number 3, position that axis, and so here's an example too where it gets, ooh, that's a little weird. I got crossing perspective lines. What is going on, right? But if you slowly move these into position, just kind of massage it, things will eventually align. And I've mentioned before in other videos, and I think in this one, it's best just to mentally block out what is happening with the rest of your model and then just focus on these perspective lines. Do your axes first, which is the yellow square, then just move things slowly into position. They don't need to be perfect, just keep moving around until they're in position. If things get totally out of whack, you can always right click and select Start Over. So I'll go ahead and do that, because it wasn't bad, but just to show you that you could. And maybe I shouldn't have, just for the sake of time, because now I got to reposition that. And I will return to the foosball table and pinball machine to show you some neat things that you can also do. But eventually, I want this to align. There's a few reasons you may or may not want to do photo match. One is to create things from photos, which I did very roughly with that dumpster photo. I show you in a little bit more detail with this one called SketchUp Match Photo Creating Signage. I create a couple, borrow a couple signs, and then tweak them to make them my own in that example. Let's put that over there, and I hope that doesn't start playing audio, because that would kind of mess up my recording, but I don't think it's going to. And these should be... Oh, that's the video playing. I knew that was going to happen. Stop. Okay, this one looks pretty good. The blue line is vertical, which I like to use that to somewhat verify that the other perspective lines are correct. It's off by a tiny bit. Oh, let's see if we can't fix that. I bet you it's this green guy right here. There we go. Once again, I could use the grid to reference the size, but I'm going to use the blue axes and just drag up. And I just kind of eyed the depth of this wall. So I wouldn't go off of these lines because of that, but I could use the height of this door because I know that is fairly accurate. So I'm going to not really worry about the edges over here, but I'll just match that up. And the rest of this looks okay. It's off by a little bit. That's probably because of the depth of that wall. But watch this. If I hit done and then take my push-pull tool, that wall depth is probably more like that. There's probably utility. Oh, hey, there you go. There's utilities in that wall. So it's thicker than the 5 inches that I guessed at. So the photo match tool becomes kind of a studying tool as well. It helps you understand wall thicknesses and spaces, and you can identify chases that you don't otherwise see in these different views. So at this point, we have successfully stitched together a few different scenes, and any type of modeling that you do would be shown up in each one of these scenes. I could continue to photo match this, but what I like to do in situations like this is just use photo match purely for the image itself, not for the sake of modeling. I just wanted to set this up so I could add in my pinball machines and my foosball tables. And I'm just turning on hidden geometry so I can select these and unhide. Let's turn off hidden geometry. Here's a situation where I don't really want to see this ghosting. I want to use this as more of a communication tool to show you what these would look like in this space and how they would fit. Well, there's some photoshopping things I would need to do for this bench, which I might actually do. But if you've hung around this long in my video, this will make the price of your patience worthwhile. If you bring up your styles dialog, which looks something like this, it looks a little bit different on Mac and PC. You should see an edit option. Underneath that edit option, you should see 5 little buttons, and the rightmost one is modeling settings. On the modeling settings, there's some match photo control. The first one, it's not the foreground models, it's the foreground opacity. So if I turn that off, I'm disabling the opacity of the image. If I turn it back on, the opacity of the model, not the opacity of the image. If I turn off the other icon, it actually turns off the background altogether. And I still have that ghosting. Well, I don't want that one. So let's turn the background photo back on, and I'll turn off the opacity. If I were to have photo matched this completely, so I will right click and project the photo there, that might be enough of a communication device because I can see what's going on here, and it's even more effective if I turn off my edges. So I've turned off the edges. It still looks a little weird. Let me turn back on my edges, because what I like to do in this situation is to actually hide the walls themselves. So if I right click and hide, that just seems like I undid everything that I was working towards. Well, now I can jump between these scenes and I can see these in context of this space. Now here's where I would need to do some photoshopping because I wouldn't be able to see through here, but it's kind of neat because you can see what's going on pretty simply. And again, it wouldn't be a matte video without a few tangent moments. Let's say we want to finish the deal here and take this into Photoshop for some post-processing to perhaps get rid of this table. Well, you might think, well, you could bring up your material dialog, go to the photos in your model, and then edit the photo. Well, that's nice. These guys must be in that pinball machine. I could edit it here because I've applied that image to different textures or different model parts, but I can't really edit the background image in here. So what we need to do is go into Photoshop, open that image up, and I believe I have that right here. And a really cool tool that you should use in Photoshop is Vanishing Point if you've not already. It allows you to identify a grid, and look at that, it doesn't look totally dissimilar to something you might do in SketchUp. So that identifies the grid. Now I can grab this clone tool, and if you've used Photoshop before, you should know the clone tool fairly well. It allows you to option click an area and then apply that. But what it's doing here is that it's painting in perspective. So check that out. How cool is that? So that gets rid of most of my tables. I'll click OK. The other really neat tool is the contextual fill. And for this to work, I'll go ahead and do, how about these pictures up here? I guess I wouldn't really need to get rid of these pictures in order to add the pinball machine, but it's easier to trace around these than it is the water fountain. So once those are selected, you then want to go to Edit, Fill, and on this dialog, make sure Content Aware is selected, hit OK, and magic happens. There we go. So in hindsight, you maybe should have did this before you imported this for the matched photo. This type of editing is okay. The type of editing you don't want to do is cropping and lens correction, which I think is somewhere over here. Lens correction, yeah, that will kind of mess up the perspective math that is required for photo match to use, but simple erasing is perfectly okay. Let's go back to SketchUp. Perhaps you have a renderer. I am partial to Shaderlight, so let me turn on Shaderlight. I'll just do a rather simple rendering here. I'll do global illumination. Now, Shaderlight does not. Other rendering tools may keep the background, the photo match background. This one does not. So when I first thought about this, I thought, oh, that might be pretty neat. Let's see what happens. And if I render this, I maybe should have set the lighting to be a little different, but let's see how it turns out. Obviously, there's no background, but what's nice about this is if you save this with Shaderlight as either a PNG or a TIFF, it will keep the background transparent, which means back in Photoshop, you can open that and that alpha channel or that transparency is respected. I'm just using shortcuts to select all and copy, and then back here I will paste and do the necessary positioning and resizing. And if I were to do a little bit higher resolution export, I wouldn't have that little edge artifacting going on. But now is where you would just do your Photoshop post-process editing, which most firms will do. You're not going to get 100% of what you need out of Photoshop or any one application for that matter. I've got that area selected. I will select the inverse, and then back on my layers, at the bottom of that dialog, there is a layer mask button, and that creates a little layer mask. And there we go. I've got myself a nice little sales pitch that I can now take to the boss and propose why we need pinball machines and foosball tables in our break area. There you go. I hope this helped. If you have any questions, use the internet to find me and ask me, or go ahead and ask in the comment sections. I will keep an eye on those as well. Thanks for watching.